cars have ruined the planet. Cars, automobiles, more than any other singular object of consumption, of transportation and industry, have caused climate breakdown. More to the point, Americans and the global north, basically here I'm talking about the northern hemisphere and the predominantly white settler colonial nation states, the wealthy countries driving around, they have caused global warming by driving cars all over the place for almost a century. Now, transportation, as I've been telling you on this podcast, is one of the industries that has not really seen a decline in its greenhouse gas emissions, like hardly ever. And if we electrify entire fleets of corporate semi-tractor trailers, and if we make all of our public buses electric, and if all of our consumer personal vehicles switch from internal combustion engine to electric vehicles, all that pollution that we've already caused driving around in these short, inefficient trips, all that pollution is still out there. All the tire dust is still coursing through our waterways and negatively impacting aquatic species. All the steel and the concrete to build roads and bridges and the asphalt laid down on top of what used to be ecosystems. All of the plastic interiors are still there, even if we electrify all of our cars and all of our buses and all of our semis. And the lithium-ion batteries that will have to be dug up out of some dry, indigenous-held territories in Australia, Chile, Argentina, China, Serbia, the United States, and other places are going to have a massive impact on climate and the terrestrial ecosystem and watersheds, and they'll pump a lot of groundwater. So those lithium mines have a massive environmental cost. Then if we burn all the energy that's needed to make a lithium-ion battery, to create it in a factory, in an industrial process, we have to transport it. We have to gather all the ingredients. All of the workers have to go to the factory. Then it turns into the lithium-ion battery. It's a part of this massive hulking piece of equipment, the EV, that seats 4 to 5 people, maybe 6. And the vast majority of the time, it's going to have just one passenger. And then all that electricity to charge it up when you plug it in to a socket, 3/4 of that electricity is going to be produced by burning fossil fuels. Some regions and some states are faring better, but even those, quote, renewables, unquote, like solar, wind turbines, geothermal, and especially hydropower, hydroelectric dams, they all have significant environmental and social, cultural impacts that are barely being discussed in the climate discourse. Renewables, electric vehicles, and the like are hailed as a magic bullet by the elite. And that's trickled down into the common person and how they discuss climate change. Because you can still make money and you can still pump out industrial products that people need to buy to get around on an individual level and pretend that you're addressing climate change. But cars have caused climate change, and cars, as I said, and as I will show you today on this podcast, have destroyed planet Earth. Hello, welcome to the Climate Talks. The climate is talking. My name is Sam Orndorff. I am coming to you once again from the Digital Humanities Center here in the basement of Love Library. This is one of my favorite places. And right up at the top here, I need to promo our live event. On Monday, April 28th, we are going to have a live version of this podcast. So please come out if you're a San Diego State University student. If you go to state, if you're in the college area, if you live in San Diego or in the region, we're going to have our live Climate Talks podcast, buddy. So it's going to be fun. We're going to have 2 great guests. I'm going to host it because nobody else wants to do it. Not that I love hearing myself speak. I don't. And not that I believe that I'm a leader. I'm not. I don't even know if I believe in top-down hierarchical authority figures. But nobody else wanted to do it. So that's why I'm going to be the host. But anyway, we're going to be having our Climate Talks podcast on Monday, April 28th, down here in the Digital Humanities Center. We're going to have food and refreshments. And we're going to have a great couple hour long conversation, talk in depth about the climate issue. What's changed in humans, in the human scale in the last 10,000 years? How are plants and their ability to adapt and evolve being dramatically shaped by the climate as it changes? All of these issues are going to be coming up, and we're going to talk about them with two great guests, Dr. Sam Bova, who is a paleoclimatologist here and paleoceanographer, as well as Dr. Lluvia Flores-Renteria, who is an evolutionary ecologist. She does a lot of botany and biology, also a professor here at San Diego State. And that's at 5 p.m. This Monday. So please come on down, and we would love to see you. We'd love to hear your questions and your comments. And that's it for our promo. I don't know if any of that was good. But anyway, here we go. Around 4 million people every year die from outdoor air pollution. You wouldn't really know that if you listen to regular conversations, sort of mainstream center-left or centrist conversation around climate change, because they want to put a bandage on the problem and not address the root issue. I'm going to address the root issue. Like I told you when we just started this thing, cars have caused climate change, okay? Airplanes, yes, obviously they contribute a lot to climate change. What else? Trains. Now, trains run on diesel, they run on fuel, they run on fossil fuel. But if you've ever been on a train, they hold a lot of people, and they can be electrified. And the train tracks, the railway, takes up way less space than roads and freeways and parking lots. So that's a plus. And those are mass transit solutions. I'll try to show you a lot of examples as to why I think this is so, and talk about the overall system and how limited our imagination is, how difficult it is for people who are not drivers, for people who are wheelchair users, for people who, for one reason or another, can't or won't or just don't like to drive. It's miserable to try and get around the United States almost everywhere unless you have a car. Why is that? We're going to talk about it. I'm coming to you once again from the Digital Humanities Center, the podcast studio there in the San Diego State University Library, down in the basement of the Dome. The Dome gets hot. I think about this every time I go into the Dome. It's almost like a greenhouse. It's basically a microcosm of our atmosphere, and when it's a hot, sunny day, that dome traps heat. And as soon as you enter the library, you get warm. That's kind of how Earth works. Our atmosphere traps heat. When we have more CO2 in our atmosphere, it gets more efficient at trapping that heat. Cars are really the problem here because they drive most of our greenhouse gas pollutions that make the planet warmer. They have all these effects on the terrestrial ecosystem. They have all these effects on the waterway. They have devastating effects for public health. They make communities separated. They rupture people from their person-to-person, that human scale contact. And I also think it's important to note that when we look at a transportation system, you really need a multimodal system where if I want to move on foot, if I like walking or running, which I do, I should be able to do that while also feeling safe and having places where I can do that. If I cannot walk, if I use a wheelchair, maybe a powered wheelchair, even temporarily from an injury, or if I'm a person who is a paraplegic or a quadriplegic, I need sidewalks. I need level sidewalks, maintained sidewalks. I need to be safe and separated from cars. If I'm on a bicycle, I need to be safe and separated from cars. A gutter with green paint and a little white stripe on the side of it is not infrastructure. That's paint. That's not protection. That is not a bike lane. Okay? Tell that to your local city planner. And the transportation system also does include trains, right? It includes all of those semis that are shipping all of our stuff all the way from one side of the country to the other. And it also includes rail, light rail, trams, trolleys, streetcars, electric buses, which would be great if we had more of in the U.S. But so much of our country, so much of our system, so much of our time is spent in cars, mostly alone. And I think that's a massive problem that we're not talking about enough. It doesn't matter if you have an electric vehicle or an internal combustion engine vehicle, the old school version. Cars are ruining the planet. So I think that one aspect of that that's been lost in the climate change discourse is that cars are really bad for public health. Now, obviously, emergency response vehicles, those are great. If you accidentally cut yourself real deep and you call 911, and they rush to your house in a car and they get you to the hospital, the emergency room really quickly, sweet, great. That's awesome. I'm not complaining about that. What I am complaining about when I talk about cars and public health is the fact that we completely, drastically underestimate just how devastating cars are to the people who live next to roads. So around 4 million people die every year from outdoor air pollution. A lot of that is coming from those coal-burning power plants or those natural gas-burning power plants, or people who live next to factories, or people who live near an oil refinery. Okay, so the fossil fuels are responsible for that air pollution, but a lot of that air pollution that's killing people, giving kids asthma, giving people lifelong problems, and cutting their life short, that's coming from cars. They're also very loud. We had a push in the 1980s to regulate the sound of cars because they can be very loud, especially if you're talking about a semi. And then somebody told Ronald Reagan about it, and then that initiative just died. So you're allowed to have your car be extra loud. I don't know why people do that. It strikes me as very bizarre, but you know, it's been correlated to sociopathy. I think there's a little bit of the "hey, look at me" syndrome. Perhaps some of those people are pea brains, but the issue there is it's a public health issue, because if you're in a noisy environment all the time, and so many of us in the city are, you're going to be exposed to a lot of traffic noise. Honking, beeping, engine revvings, screeching, all that stuff. And that has a really negative impact on your health. It can cause heart disease and dementia. So that's a public health issue. And now, if you look at the public health discourse, especially the sort of consumption-based, they want you to buy a product to get healthy. There's this sort of conspiracy theory bullshit about how seed oil is bad for you. No, seed oil is fine. Humans have been eating the oil from seeds for thousands of years. Okay, so fuck that. You know what's bad for your health? Being next to a freeway. Being next to an idling car. That's bad for your health. Sitting down all the time is bad for your health. You know, people wonder why is the Mediterranean diet so healthy? What is it about the old people that live to 100 and they are able to move around in Greece and in Italy, that Mediterranean diet? Sure, it's the diet, but you know what else it is? They have communities, and they don't sit their ass down in a car every time they need to go from point A to point B. They probably move around more in their elderly life than the average middle-aged American who is able-bodied. People drive to the gym here. Why would you drive to the gym? Run! You know, there's also the unhealthiness of masculinity is tied into cars. There's the sort of youthful, I feel invincible version of driving a car where people treat life like a video game and switch and swerve and dodge and duck between lanes and between cars without using a signal. That's very reckless and dangerous. So fuck cars. If you ever get a chance, if you use the website Reddit, go to the subreddit Fuck Cars. It's great. There's a lot of discourse about this. I think the discourse comes up a little bit short on that forum in terms of talking about mobility justice and people who cannot or choose not to drive. And I think it comes up short when it talks about the environment. But those are problems that you see in the culture at large. We don't think about how devastating cars are to the environment, mostly because you can't see it. So cars, when they run, they produce CO2, a lot of it. They also emit out of the tailpipe a lot of other greenhouse gases, including O3, which I've talked about on this podcast. But the issue with how do we fuel them up, gasoline, petrol, for my UK listeners. I doubt anybody's listening in the United Kingdom, but how do we get our oil that is refined to turned into gasoline, pump it into the car? Through violence. That's how we get it. Okay? Cars, getting around in cars is a huge undertaking for the U.S. military. It's been estimated around 25% of U.S. military operations safeguard fossil fuel extraction, and the U.S. military itself burns a lot of fuel in its Navy, in its Air Force, and in its Army. But here's the thing. Think way back to when I talked about those global climate change agreements. You know, you got the Paris Accords, 2015. You got Copenhagen in 2009. And further back in time in history, you got the 1997 Kyoto Accords. In the 97 Kyoto Accords, the U.S. was, that was the Clinton administration. We were there. We were talking to these other countries and their representatives to try and tackle the issue of global warming, as they would have called it back then. And one thing we did that's been an issue for the last couple decades is we said, hey, let's not include the military in our country's emissions levels. Don't include all of the Air Force test flights, the Navy going from one country to another, burning fuel to do that, all of the Army trucks that are going all over the place, the tanks, etc. Let's not include that in our overall fossil fuel production and greenhouse gas level when we measure it. The guy who was pushing that idea was the CEO of Halliburton, Dick Cheney, former vice president. That was his idea. And that lasted, and no country, I think including the U.S. and any other country, was responsible for including or measuring or monitoring all of the fuel that its military burned when it went to meet in international climate discussions. That was just completely off the table up until 2015. I think they started to change that in the Paris Climate Accords. But that's it. But that's a big issue, right? You know, if you watched our documentary from last year, that was my dissertation project. I've been fortunate to work with the people of Red Mountain who have a sacred landscape that was the site of a massacre in 1865. One of the massacres, one of those instances of the United States committing genocide against indigenous Paiute, Shoshone, and Bannock people in northern Nevada. On that site, there is a very large amount of lithium that is currently being dug up for electric vehicles. So it's a cycle. The U.S. takes land, they sell it out. The U.S. takes land through conquest, through violence. It then has that land as sort of a public common resource. It marginalizes and confines indigenous peoples onto reservations, and then it sells that land at a really cheap price and subsidizes water. And in some cases and in some regions of the U.S., land was actually given away to white settlers for free, exclusively to white settlers. We have a racial, racist, capitalist system. And so how we're getting around, even if it's EVs, is wrapped up in all of the issues that cars still have. And it's also wrapped up in this history of injustice and environmental injustice. And so you'll hear often in sort of American leftist circles this idea that the global south is going to be the front lines of the EV production. And when we go to get EVs, we should really think about people in less developed countries. No, think about people in this country, in the United States. Think about the fact that EVs are still made up of oil. The roads are still made through industrial processes, through a lot of oil itself. An EV contains about 200 minerals. A regular internal combustion engine vehicle has way less, about 40. So EVs are more heavy. They have a lot more mining that has to happen around the world. And yet they're still being called zero emissions vehicles, which is a term that does a lot of heavy lifting that I have now grown to hate, because it's preposterous to look at that, like I called it, a massive hulking piece of metal and glass and plastic, and say that it took zero emissions to create it and it takes zero emissions for it to move around. It doesn't. It emits pollution. It scrapes into the earth. It destroys ecosystems. And at the site of the lithium mine, where all of that lithium is mined up, the animals will be heavily impacted. They'll have to leave or be killed. The water is pumped. Millions of groundwater will be pumped to create a solution with the lithium to sort of mix it with water and other chemicals so that it evaporates and becomes a more useful version of that element. But the car company who's responsible, which would be General Motors in this case, and the mine company from Canada, Lithium Americas Corporation, they act like they're environmental stewards. They say, they're on record saying, this is an 18,000 acre lithium mine, but only 5 acres is actually going to be permanently disturbed habitat, because they have these fancy conservation schemes. They have these permitting systems where they work with federal agencies and local state agencies to say, you're permitted to pollute. You're literally permitted with a permit, and you're allowed to do that. So they get to present this picture like they're environmental stewards. And that's very ironic. How are we following car companies, mining companies, governments as the leaders of climate change? They're not. That way destruction lie. We know what happens when car companies, when mine companies are in charge of environmental issues. They don't do a good job because their main motive is profit. They want to make money off the lithium. And they want to do that by getting people into individual cars with this neoliberal consumption plan where if you want to get around, and a lot of people in Nevada use cars to get around, which is where that mine is, up in Nevada, northern Nevada, not far from Oregon. If you want to get around, they want you to buy a car individually. They want you to go in debt to get that car, and they don't care if you carpool or not. Now, if this car company, this mining company in the United States itself, wanted to have an efficient, justice-oriented mobility system, why wouldn't the lithium go towards electric scooters, towards electric wheelchairs, which also can use lithium-ion batteries? Why wouldn't it go towards bicycles or buses, electric buses, or electric streetcars or trolleys or trams? Because they want profit first. They're not trying to do any kind of serious, massive overhaul to the system we have, which is where everybody is very disconnected. Everybody, for the most part, needs to get around in cars. And the solution has been to put people in cars, spread everything out, constantly build freeways. And the downside of that is there is less and less and less money for trolleys, for trams, for trains, for light rail, for buses. All of those things are being constantly undercut by the investment in cars. So cars are ruining the urban fabric. They're shredding it. When cars were invented, entire neighborhoods, mostly of black and brown and poor people, Mexican people, Chinese people, Native American people, communities of color in urban America, when freeways were built in the 50s, were destroyed. People had to leave. The federal government said, we're going to build this interstate and we're going to go right through the fucking middle of the city and just completely bulldoze these walkable neighborhoods and not replace any of those homes and not replace the way those people got around with buses, with cars, with trolleys and trains. So that's a huge problem because cars take up a ton of space. I can't emphasize this enough. Cars require massive amounts of space. And because the United States is a pretty big country, it's one of the biggest, what we have done is we have massively transformed, restructured the way that city life has worked, the way that urban spaces look and feel, and rural spaces, by the way, by subsidizing cheap land and cheap water and building out and out and out and sprawling and not building up with urban density. So what do I mean by that? Before cars were invented, let's go back. So before cars came around, there were cities. Cities have been around for a long ass time, right? In human history, we've always kind of had cities. Way, way before there was a capitalist system, there were cities. Cities were built with these little, tightly knit. There would be walkways. There would be stacked apartments. There would be amenities, services, hospitals, schools, markets, public spaces, all really close together because it's nice to be able to walk around. So the old cities in the United States, especially on the East Coast, still have those little cute, quaint, walkable areas. They might have a little promenade that's got a cobblestone or brick. Just the feeling of walking through those places is amazing. Now, those have become places for the rich because there's less and less of them. And because the move has been to invest in cars, invest in suburbs, to sprawl out, give away cheap land to these development companies. They set up cookie cutter homes. They destroy the ecosystem. They don't leave any trees. They don't leave a single tree. And they pave it all over. Everybody's going to be really spread out, far from schools, hospitals, churches, groceries, restaurants, etc. So they got to get in a car to go from point A to point B. That has been the disaster of the last century. And when they first introduced cars, nobody wanted them. They had to induce the demand. They created this desire for cars in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and then by the 1950s and 60s, you have this raising of the middle class, this investment in white America, and the scraps go to the rest. And then more people wanted cars. They were also treated as this symbol of status. But if you go back to when cars first started being on the road, they didn't know what to do with them. There would be horse and buggies, there would be street vendors, kids playing in the street, and people would get hit just like they do now. And there was a pretty staunch opposition in a lot of cities to get the cars out of the areas where people want to live, right? And I think that that energy, where'd that energy go? Please, can we bring that back, right? Because cars are still dangerous. They still hit people. They still hit animals all the time. And the feeling that you get when you're at a cafe, and I'm picturing a cafe in Europe or a cafe in one of those very rare, special old neighborhoods pre-World War II, where that part of the city, if it's in America, that part of the city is going to have a lot of little shops and cute stuff and probably doesn't have a lot of parking. It probably has sections of it where cars can't go. Those are havens, okay? Imagine sitting at a cafe there. You get your little latte, you get your little lemonade, whatever you drink, whatever you eat. It's pleasant. It's not loud. You don't have to breathe fumes. Now imagine that you're in a cafe here in San Diego. I'm thinking of one not far from SDSU. It is on El Cajon Boulevard. El Cajon Boulevard is a 4-lane mini highway through the middle of the fucking city. It was going to be the 8 interstate freeway, and then they decided, hey, let's put the 8 interstate freeway down there in the San Diego River Valley. So that's where the 8 freeway is, and we still have this 4-lane mini freeway that's going through my neighborhood where I live. And there's a cafe there. I would love to sit at that cafe outside with my dog and my girlfriend and just drink coffee, enjoy the views, enjoy each other's company. But there's semis careening down the road, going like 30, 40, maybe more miles per hour constantly. It's miserable, right? And, I've heard a lot of people complain about, well, where am I going to park? I don't care. I don't know. Take a bus. Or act like you're some kind of royalty and take an Uber. Get driven around like you have a chauffeur. I don't want to hear you complain about parking if you refuse to use public transit. Public transit is great here, okay? It's slow. It's shitty. It doesn't connect everywhere. I still have to walk about a mile to get to the trolley, but I love it, okay? We constantly have less and less investment in transit because cars have so much power and people are obsessed with their cars. They want to be in the car. They want to live that life. I don't. I hate driving. I love taking transit. So last time I went up to do field work, actually it was like last weekend. When I got back, so I flew because I'm running out of time. I've also taken the train up there to do field work, which is cool. It takes forever, but again, I hate driving. I've driven up there too, but this time I flew. When I got back, I didn't want to pay, $30, $40 to take an Uber from the airport to home, even though it only takes 25 minutes. I was like, well, if there's a couple, I could take rapid transit, so I'll do that. It costs $2.50. It's basically free. It took about an hour. It took about double the amount of time, but it was nice. It was pleasant. I love the feeling of sitting on a bus, not having to think, get to be a man of the people, get to interact with people, get to interact in a public space that's moving. One of the interactions I had when I lived in LA was I used to take all kinds of transit up there because of my work. I was substitute teaching, I was tutoring, I was going all over from every corner of the city. So I really got to see a lot of different places and use a lot of different transit routes. And one time this guy saw that I had a Dodgers hat on and he asked, "Is that just a hat? Are you a fan?" And I hang my head and I say, "I'm just a hat." But he was just kind of friendly and talkative and he said, "Oh man, baseball, the Dodgers are good this year. It's the greatest game in the world. Maybe you should look." And I listened to him, and now I watch baseball a lot. And I think about baseball, and I think about the way that our stadiums, or stadia, if you're pretentious, the way that our big sports arenas are set up in America is shocking because they have these vast parking lots because we don't have the imagination and we don't have the willpower to say the greatest way to get people from all over into an arena is with public transit. Mass transit. So we don't have these massive parking lots, right? There's a handful of baseball stadiums that are still woven into the fabric of the city. Petco Park is one, actually, and it's not surrounded by massive hulking parking lots. But people aren't interacting as much anymore because they're constantly in cars. There's still heavy transit users. Certain communities are much more reliant on transit. Of course, people who are disabled, people with disabilities. There's a lot of people who are working class and poor, can't afford a car. I read in one book that nearly half of Native American people are non-drivers. So you really have to think about who actually uses public transit. What are those interactions that you're missing if you're not using it? There was a story that's shown in the film 42, which is a biopic about Jackie Robinson, where I think it was the year before he broke the color barrier in 47 for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He gets on a train. I know it's shocking for a celebrity to get on a train. That wouldn't happen in America. He gets on a train and he meets a little kid who in the film is depicted as Ed Charles, who would go on to later play in baseball and have a illustrious career. You know, he tosses him a ball. Now imagine that happening in America today. You would never see a well-known athlete of any kind of visibility getting onto public transit, and you're not going to have those interactions because we're all stuck in cars. So that's really something I think about a lot. It's hard to imagine things otherwise because so many of us were raised out in the countryside, and if we wanted to get anywhere, you get in the car first. Or you're raised in the suburb, and you might be lucky and have some walking trails that connect the cul-de-sac to a main road. Then you're on the main road, and it's miserable. There's 4 lanes. People are zooming by unsafely in a lot of cases. You try to cross a street at a traffic light, and the motherfucker who's trying to turn right on red doesn't even look at you, doesn't even think about you because they're in a car and they're car-brained. Hate that shit. All right? We got to get away from that, and we have to think beyond the realm of cars for our health, for our society, for the environment, for the more than humans, for people who cannot drive. We have to think about this. Traffic engineers, city planners, and urban planners, local city councils, I'm looking at you because you have been totally shackled by cars. You plan around cars and you're not even that good at it because you use made-up service numbers and you use made-up minimum parking spaces that pave over every possible space. And then you have these downtowns in America, from large to small cities, where it's just a fucking parking lot that's empty most of the year. It's empty most of the day. That's a spot that could easily have a business. It could be taxed. It could benefit the local economy, but it's just a parking lot. So we need a multimodal urban plan. We need a traffic diet, even though Donald Trump just scrapped that idea. We need to go back to a way of planning a space where you don't need a car to get around and you're safe whether you're in a car or you're not. And when you build cars and when you build freeways and you add lanes, one more lane, bro, right? You actually increase demand. That induces demand. You build one more lane, it's going to clog up right away. Now, you keep the lanes the way they are. You add more service. You make it appealing. You make it safe. You make it cheap. You make it affordable, reliable, and come on time, and accessible. Then you got a different system, and you got things moving in the right direction. Some cities are doing that. Some cities in America, like I think Boston, there are some others around the world, I think in Estonia, they have fare-free transit. You need to go somewhere, get on the train, it's free. Boom. Right? We could do that. Why don't we do that? I'm on one today. I'm really on one today, okay? I'm zooted on coffee. I'm talking to you from the heart. The pressure is on because, so recently I had an idea for an article, maybe an op-ed. I pitched it to a few magazines. They didn't take it. But if you want to take this idea, please, by all means, you know what? I don't care. You please credit me in this podcast. But if you don't, I don't care because I want the idea out there. Cars have ruined the planet. It's hard for us to imagine an aspect of contemporary life in the U.S. that is not moved through fossil-fueled car travel. From cradle to matrimony to the grave, we are in cars. Pregnant moms in labor rushed to the hospital in a car. Newlyweds driving off in their car with streamers and scrawled messages from their friends. Down to the hearse driven to the graveyard. And you can see this just in romantic and in drama themes. You can see the extent to which cars drive a wedge between human connection. It is striking to look at popular TV and film that is set in the US. It will often skip over an entire setting or space where people actually meet, which is on the bus or the train. Now, you did see that in the UK-based TV series Baby Reindeer, right? There's a lot of the narrative that happens in public transit. Now, contrast that with the status-driven, individualized auto mobility that you see in shows like The Real Housewives of any city, right? Do they take the train? No. They get in vans to do everything. Pretty much every Bravo show is like that, but I'm a fan. And there was another Netflix show which I did not see. I do enjoy watching dating reality TV shows, but there was one I saw a screen cap from, or I think it was just a clip I saw from. And a man in Atlanta who's looking for love, trying to find a match, somebody who could have as a significant other. He refused to go to downtown Metro Atlanta because of the traffic. I mean, how many times have you heard about that, right? It's its own meme. It's its own the idea of traffic in some of these places is as integral to how you think about them as the place itself. And that's a tragedy. That's an ecological disaster. It's making us isolated. It's making it hard for us to meet people. And by the way, Atlanta has public transit, right? So if you refuse to go downtown because you don't want to be stuck in traffic, fair. Why don't you consider public transit? And it doesn't even have to be public. Those companies don't have to be public entities to run. There are private mass transit systems that work fairly well, and we used to have a lot of those in the United States. But that's the issue, right? So we got to go from individualized solutions that are making money and destroying the ecosystem to mass solutions that work for everybody, that are affordable, clean, reliable, and mobility focused. Now, before I leave you, I want to give you some things to think about. Look it up. Wherever you live, pick a spot that's kind of far away, could be like 5 miles away, maybe like a little bit too far for you to walk. If you have a bike, that's no problem, if you're able to use a bicycle. But pick a spot maybe on the other side of town or the next town over if you live in the country, and look up on Google, how long does it take to drive there? So for me, if I want to go downtown, if I drive there, it takes about like 17 minutes, right? That's what Google Maps will tell you. And then if I hit transit from where I live to downtown San Diego, transit's going to be probably 55 minutes. Now, Google Maps is not giving you the whole story because, number one, there could be traffic when you're driving that it usually accounts for, but you never know. You could get stuck in traffic. Google Maps does not tell you how long it takes to look for free parking. We shouldn't even have free parking. Our gas is too cheap. Our parking is too cheap. You can park your car for free, but you can't park your body for free. You got to pay rent, right? Okay, back to the point here. So Google Maps exaggerates how quickly an individual car trip takes, and it over-exaggerates how quick transit takes. Because when I get on transit, I'm in. Boom, I'm there. I don't have to think. I don't have to drive. I'm just free. I'm free. I like taking transit downtown, even though it takes close to 50 minutes, because, if you really factor in that 17-minute drive downtown, and then you go look for parking for free, that could take 5 to 10, maybe even more. And that's not part of that overall thing. So maybe it takes me about 30 minutes to get downtown if I include parking time, and it takes me 50 minutes on transit where I don't have to look for parking or anything like that. That's a 20-minute difference. That's not a big deal. And transit is cheap. Transit's only $2.50 here, and you get that free transfer. But what are you going to do with that 20 minutes? Are you that much of an important person? Are you so VIP that you couldn't use that 20 minutes to do something productive? Think about that. I also wanted to leave you guys with some examples of really good books that have informed this podcast and informed my way of thinking about cars and why I hate them so much. So the first one is Mimi Scheller, Mobility Justice, The Politics of Movement in an Age of Extreme. She talks a lot about the discussion around mobility in general, but not so much with cars. Now, Anna Zivarts, who's a disability rights advocate, wrote a really good book just last year called When Driving is Not an Option, Steering Away from Car Dependency. So that's a super quick read. It's like 100 pages, really great. Ben Goldfarb wrote a book called Crossings, How Road Ecology is Shaping the Future of the Planet. I've only read about half of that. My sister got it for me as a gift. So it's a great book. It talks a lot about the ecological impact of cars, especially roadkill. Susan Handy's book, Shifting Gears, that's geared towards a planning and traffic engineering perspective. So thinking toward a new way of thinking about transportation is the subtitle. And then Nicholas Dagenblum's The Great American Transit Disaster, A Century of Austerity, Autocentric Planning, and White Flight is a really good history of several different cities and how they have gutted public transportation and the issues around that. So these are all the things I really want you to think about. Try to do things differently. Try to think differently. Spread the word about how dangerous and devastating cars are for the planet. So if you have any questions for me that you would like for us to cover when we have our live Climate Talks podcast recording, go ahead and send us those questions and those comments, those critiques. If you want to have anything that you would like to share, please do. And go ahead and send those to climatetalksquestion@gmail.com. That's it for this one. Take care, and we'll see you next time.